Her smile was the only thing that could silence the chaos in his world. An entire empire could fall, but all it took was seeing her smile for him to remember why he came back. She was peace in the storm, lightness amidst the weight of billions. But on a cold night, when she smiled for the last time and closed the door without saying anything, he thought he had won. He was wrong. Her silence was a sentence, and he would only discover that when it was too late. Because sometimes losing someone who loves you in silence is the cruelest punishment of all. He believed she would always be there, that her gaze, sweet and faithful, was part of the scenery, like the sunset over Manhattan, seen from the penthouse balcony. He thought love was something you could put on hold, postpone with empty promises, lull yourself to sleep with expensive gifts. But that simple woman, of humble origins and a deep soul, wanted none of that. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be chosen. And the night he decided that work was more important than the dinner he had arranged with her, the universe registered his mistake, and the scales of fate began to tip. Now he could have everything, except what mattered most. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. Lost among mirrored glass, million-dollar figures, and contracts that turned faster than the hands of any clock, Ethan Wallace was a name that made other men bow down and investors hold their breath. An empire built with coldness and precise decisions, a life of luxury designed with the perfectionism of someone born to succeed. And yet, every night, he returned home as if something was always out of place, until her laughter filled the spaces that neither Italian marble nor French wine could reach. Chloe was not a woman who fit into his universe, and perhaps that was why she enchanted him so much. Her hair tied up unpretentiously, the eyes that seemed to have read all the tragedies in the world, and yet chose to love with kindness, the way she arranged the sofa cushions with affection. Everything about her was light, silent, and essential. They met on the sidewalk in front of Ethan's apartment building, when she, with an umbrella blown by the wind, tried to protect a cheap bouquet she had bought for her elderly neighbor. He watched from afar inside the armored car, and didn't understand why he had stared for so long. The next day he saw her again, and again, until she smiled at him, a shy smile, almost like an apology for existing. That got through all his defenses. It didn't take long for her to invent an excuse to talk, to offer a ride, coffee, an informal dinner. Chloe refused 3 times. She accepted the 4th time, but only if it was at a small restaurant, away from cameras. He found himself saying sure, as if he were the employee and not the billionaire. And that was how the story began, with him trying to impress her with the world, and she only wanting to talk to the man behind the suit. Over the next few months, she quietly became a part of his life. She would arrive with a homemade cake, laugh at the slang he didn't understand, fix his tie before important events, and disappear during photos so she wouldn't be seen. She never asked for anything. She never made demands. She was just there, all of her, kind, trustworthy. He would say that her smile was what made him come home, and she would smile without knowing that that was all she needed to hear. But time passed, and Ethan began to take her presence for granted. He got used to their silent love like someone gets used to the morning sun, until one day he decided not to come back. He had an event in Chicago, a business meeting that couldn't wait. He sent her a quick message saying, "I'll make up for it later," and she simply replied, "Okay." That night, Chloe set the table alone, waited, until the wine was cold, smiled one last time in the mirror and understood. This wasn't about forgetting dinner, it was about everything he'd never noticed. The next day, when Ethan came back, the house was clean, the coffee was ready, but she was gone. And he, with all the money in the world, had no idea how to find her. She didn't arrive like a hurricane. She didn't demand attention. She didn't take up space with intensity. She was like a breeze coming through a forgotten open window. Ethan, accustomed to women who attended social events with bold dresses, rehearsed laughter, and sharp ambitions, didn't immediately understand why he thought so much about that discreet girl on the sidewalk. Chloe seemed to move through the world at a different pace. She worked in a small neighborhood bookstore, lived in a modest apartment with plants hanging from the balcony, and had worn the same shoes for years. But there was something about her that no evening dress could ever simulate. Peace. A peace that contrasted brutally with the rush that devoured his days. The first dinner was simple. She suggested a handmade pasta restaurant where the owners knew each customer's name. Ethan, who had never eaten there without advance reservations or waiters in suits, found the atmosphere strange. But all he had to do was watch her talk to the lady at the next table, smiling with a naturalness he hadn't seen in a long time, to realize he had entered unfamiliar and necessary territory. She spoke. Little listened a lot, and that disarmed him. For the first time in years he found himself telling stories about his childhood, about his absent father, about the anxiety attacks stifled by medication, and about the fear that everything he had was just a shell. Chloe listened, didn't judge. She simply placed her hand on his and said, "You don't have to carry everything by yourself." Their meetings became frequent. She was never impressed by the luxury cars, the invitations to travel, or the toasts on private terraces. She preferred to walk in Central Park, eat street pizza, and watch old movies while sitting on the living room floor with blankets. Ethan didn't know how to deal with it at first. He wanted to please her with grandeur, but she always dismantled his efforts with simple gestures. When he showed up with a priceless piece of jewelry, Chloe thanked him but left it in the box. "It's beautiful, but my neck doesn't need it. I prefer it when you make me coffee without sugar." "The wrong way," she said, laughing. And with that laugh he felt the world slow down. Little by little she began to occupy spaces without invading. She brought flowers that she picked herself in parks. She put notes in books that she left scattered around his house. Chapter 4 reminded me of you. She always left her favorite cup on the bottom shelf, and even when she slept there she never left a mess. It was as if she respected his space as a sanctuary, and perhaps that was why, over time, Ethan began to see her as something eternal, something guaranteed, not out of malice, but because silent love is the easiest to forget. It doesn't demand, it doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten to leave. It just stays, until the day it doesn't stay anymore. On good days, Chloe would arrive before him, light a soft candle in the living room, and put on the jazz playlist he liked, even though he didn't understand anything about that slow sound. She would sit on the couch with a book on her lap and wait, not anxiously, but with the serenity of someone who knew that love didn't have to be noisy. When he walked through the door, tired, irritated by numbers that didn't add up or meetings that didn't flow, she would just smile and say, "It's okay, I'm here." There was no judgment, just presence. And, without realizing it, Ethan began to lean on that, as if leaning on an invisible cane. He began to look for the scent of lavender in the air, her small gestures around the house, the sound of her bare feet on the wooden floor. But silent love is also dangerous, because when it doesn't shout or demand, it runs the risk of being taken for granted. And that's exactly what happened. The intensity of work grew, the commitments increased, and Ethan began to fail with small promises. "I won't be able to arrive at 8 today. I'll see you tomorrow, I swear. I won't be able to go on that trip, but I'll make it up to you." Chloe always smiled, with the same gentleness. She said, "It's okay," sometimes with a light kiss, other times with a touch of the hand. She never complained, she just observed. She watched with a sinking heart, as the man who had once made a point of listening to her stories was now lost in urgent notifications and phone calls. He still loved her, perhaps, but his love was distracted, and hers, so whole, began to retreat into silence. She stopped bringing flowers. She stopped writing notes. She began coming home late, sleeping over, saying she was tired too. But Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy trying to control the world, not realizing that the only territory that mattered was crumbling beneath his feet. And then there was her gaze, a gaze that had begun to change. It was still gentle, but now it had a kind of distance, as if she were looking at him for the last time even though she was there. It was a love that still held on, but was already preparing to leave. Chloe didn't blame him. She knew he wasn't cruel or evil. He just hadn't learned to recognize what was sacred. And she was sacred, not out of pride, but because she carried a rare love, the kind that heals. And what heals, when ignored, doesn't come back. One night, he came home later than ever. He had forgotten about the 2-year anniversary of their meeting. She said nothing. She made tea, put on the same old music, and they sat on the couch like two tired strangers. He told her about the multi-million-dollar merger he had closed. She smiled. But the smile didn't say, "I'm happy for you." It said, "Now I understand." And in that silence the decision began to dawn. The first time she felt like she was no longer being seen was on a random Friday. They were in the car on their way to a dinner with investors, and she mentioned an idea she had for a small charity campaign, something simple with books and children. He responded with a distracted, "Cool," his eyes fixed on his phone, his fingers sliding across the screen as if searching for another world. Chloe fell, silent, not out of pride but out of exhaustion. It was as if her words were stones thrown into a pond that was too deep. They disappeared without a sound. From then on, small situations began to form a larger picture. He started to schedule dinners at the last minute, cancel weekends with vague excuses, and failed to let her know when he was going to travel. She didn't demand anything. She just adapted. She waited, sitting on the porch step, not knowing if he would come. Sometimes she would make her own dinner and eat it alone, listening to the same music they were playing. She told herself that she understood, that he was a busy man, that love requires understanding. But deep down, something inside her was starting to wither. Not from a lack of love, but from too much waiting. One night he came home drunk, not violent, just euphoric over the top, talking loudly, laughing at nonsense, spilling wine on the light carpet. Chloe helped him lie down, took off his shoes, covered him with the light blanket and turned out the lights. But before he left the room, he muttered, "You're always here, aren't you, like a shadow?" And then he laughed. She froze. It wasn't said with malice, but it hurt her as if it were. Shadow. The word kept spinning inside her like a sentence. From that night on, Chloe began to silently record everything that was keeping her apart. She kept gestures, forgetfulness, silences that were too long. One day, while washing his clothes, she found a napkin with a number scribbled on it. She didn't cry. She just folded it and threw it away. She knew that Ethan wasn't unfaithful in body, but he was becoming unfaithful in presence. He was divided between her and the world at that moment was winning. She tried to hold on. She brought him homemade cake. He would say, "I'm not hungry." She would leave notes. He wouldn't answer. He started to stop showing up. He would say, "I thought you'd come." When she did, he would say, "I thought you wouldn't come." And so the missed encounters became a habit. The touches became rare. The words became practical. And even his gaze, the one that used to shine when he saw her, now always seemed delayed, as if she were there, too early or too late, never at the right time. Chloe didn't scream, demand or beg, but she also didn't dream anymore. Her heart, which had previously leapt at the sight of him, now just watched. And in the silence that he mistook for stability, an absence began to grow. There was something almost sacred about the way Chloe loved. There was never any blackmail, drama, or demands. She wasn't the type to demand attention, nor did she use silence as punishment. She was, in essence, presence, the kind that gives herself completely without expecting the spotlight. Maybe that's why he didn't know what to do with so much. Ethan was trained to negotiate everything, figures, agreements, even emotions. But with her, there was no bargaining. There was surrender. And he, without realizing it, began to treat it as something that would always be there, as if her sweetness were a permanent feature of his life. She never asked him to change. She never said, "You hurt me," even when he forgot her on an important date, even when he brought his body close but left his heart at the office. Chloe settled for less, but not because she deserved less. It was because she believed that love is not demanded, it is chosen. And she expected to be chosen, not once, but every day. She expected that between a contract and a phone call he would say, "You are more important than this." but he never did. And slowly she began to realize that the silence she had used to protect them was now hurting her. One late afternoon, Ethan found her sitting on the floor of the porch drawing something on a napkin. He walked past her in a hurry, talking on the phone, and didn't notice that she was hiding her eyes. Hours later, at dinner, she handed him the napkin with the drawing. It was the view from their porch with two tiny dots sitting side by side. "Is that us?" he asked, forcing a smile. "It was," she replied, and she went back to eating in silence. He didn't understand. And maybe he didn't even want to understand. She never wanted luxury either. When he tried to surprise her with a trip to Paris, she refused. "Take me to see the sunset in the countryside." He laughed, thinking it was a joke, but she was serious. She wanted simple things. She wanted to feel the wind. Hear his laughter outside of business, see him barefoot and carefree. He, however, thought everything had to be grand, and the more he tried to impress her with what money could buy, the further she drifted away to what money could never buy. Sometimes he would come home with expensive flowers. She would say thank you and put them in an old vase, the same one she had always used. Not out of disdain, but because flowers, to her, were valuable for the gesture, not the price. One Sunday night, he came in and saw her lying on the couch with a faded blanket. He said, "You deserve better." And she replied, "But this smells like me." It was at that sentence that something broke inside him. But he didn't yet know that this was one of his last Sundays with her, because her love wouldn't end all at once. It would slowly withdraw, like someone turning off the lights in a house that is no longer theirs. That Thursday, the sky seemed to want to warn her. The afternoon was falling slowly over. Manhattan and the wind was blowing colder than usual for April. Chloe spent the whole day preparing dinner. She made his favorite recipe, the one he learned from his grandmother, and that he only made on important dates. She bought a wine that went well with the sauce, lit new candles, and turned their music on low just to fill the air. It was a night she had been waiting for weeks, the day that would mark 3 years since they first saw each other on the sidewalk, when her umbrella turned over and he laughed with his eyes. She still remembered the color of his tie, the smell of his car, the kindness in his gesture of opening the door. She wasn't expecting a gift or big words. She just wanted to see him arrive, leave his jacket on the back of his chair, loosen his tie and smile like before. She wanted him to notice her effort, to say, "You thought of everything, didn't you?" But at 7:42 p.m., her cell phone vibrated. The message was short. "A quick trip came up. Dinner with investors. I promised to make it up to you. I love you." She read it twice. She didn't reply. She just put her cell phone on the table, blew out the candles, but left the music playing. She sat alone at the table, the plate still warm in front of her. She looked at the empty chair as if looking into a mirror. She felt alone inside a presence that still existed, but was no longer there. She didn't open the wine. She put the dinner away. And in that silence, without tears or anger, she understood. She understood that he would never choose what was simple, because he was too caught up in what was grand. That he would continue to believe that love can wait, that dinners can be rescheduled, that presents can be replaced by promises. She tidied up as calmly as ever. She washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and put away the embroidered napkins she only used on special occasions. There was no anger in her gestures. There was mourning. The mourning of something that still breathed but was no longer alive. Before going to sleep, she wrote a few lines in a notebook. "Today I said goodbye. He will only notice when it is too late." Ethan, on the other hand, was in another time zone, in another time, at another table. He made toasts, talked about profits, laughed with strangers. He had no idea that on the other side of the city, the woman he claimed to love was silently starting to leave. Not physically, but from where it matters, from the sacred space between affection and recognition. And once that space is broken, there is no wealth that can rebuild it. The next morning, the sun came through the window as usual, passing through the thin curtains and drawing soft lights on the wooden floor. The house was silent. Ethan was still asleep. He had come back late, exhausted, with his jacket thrown over the arm of the sofa and his shoes left near the door. Chloe was already up. She drank her coffee slowly, putting on his blouse, one of the few things that still smelled of affection. She walked through the house as if it were the last time, stopping in the rooms, fixing details, folding sheets that she herself had chosen months ago. The routine was the same, but the intention was different. She made no drama. There were no open suitcases, no farewell letters scattered about. Just a melancholy serenity in her gestures. She folded her clothes carefully, put on the necklace he had given her, not for value, but for memory. She ran her fingers along the frame of a photo where the two of them were smiling, lying on the grass, a time when he still saw in her more than a discreet shadow at the end of the day. He left the cup clean, the bed made, the smell of cake baking in the air. It was a silent gesture of tenderness, a goodbye without words. On the table he placed an envelope with just one page. "Thank you for everything. One day you will understand. C." No accusations, no requests for return, no long explanations. Just the mark of someone who loved until the end, and who now chose to leave without hurting anyone. At 8:13 a.m., she closed the door without making a sound, and before going downstairs, she looked for the last time at the apartment where she had planted affection, listening and presence. She didn't cry. She just smiled. That smile that one day he said was the reason he came home. But now he was asleep, and when he woke up, absence would taste like cold coffee and silence. Ethan only realized it around 9. He got up slowly, tripping over his own clothes, opening the fridge to get juice. He found the smell of cake strange, but he thought she had gone for a walk. When he noticed the Maid bed, the dry towel, the pictures slightly moved, something inside him trembled. He called her name once, then again, louder. Silence. He ran through the rooms. Nothing. When he found the envelope, he sat down at the table, not knowing what to think. He read the short message with bated breath. He looked around the house. Everything was the same. And yet everything was different. The house had no soul anymore. It was just concrete and expensive furniture. Her cup was no longer on the shelf. The place where she sat now felt like a void that money could not fill. That's when he understood. That smile she had given him last was no longer a gesture of love. It was a goodbye. For the first few days, he pretended it was just a fit of rage. He convinced himself that she needed space, time, something he would quickly make up for. With a noble gesture, a grand gift, or a well-articulated apology. But as the hours turned into days and the days began to hurt, reality began to set in like a crack growing in the walls of his apartment, slowly, inevitably. Chloe gave no sign of him. She didn't call, she didn't respond. No texts, no notifications. Ethan searched the places where she'd left notes. Behind the frame of the bookshelf, in the leather notebook she used to jot down loose thoughts. He found nothing, only her scent. Still lingering on the sheets and the cloth napkins she'd hand-washed herself, that was the first real blow. Because for the first time, he realized he had no idea where to find her. He didn't know the names of her friends, or the address of the bookstore where she'd worked before she'd gotten together with him. He'd never bothered to ask, and now even if he had all the money in the world, he couldn't buy his way back. The nights became long. He tried to fill the space with music, but none of it made sense. He turned on the TV, left it on any channel, just to fill the echo that filled the house. I went through her clothes in the closet and couldn't decide if it hurt more to take them off or leave them there. I slept badly. I woke up expecting her to be on the porch, with her hair tied up and her eyes full of sweet silence. But the porch was empty. The air, colder. One Saturday, he tried to go out. He met up with friends, forced himself to laugh, and drank too much. Someone asked about her, and he lied. He was traveling to see his family. But inside he was in pieces. When he got back, he staggered home and saw his reflection in the living room mirror. He was pale, aged, and had sunken eyes. She always told him he needed to sleep more, take better care of his health and eat slowly, things he ignored while he thought he had time. He began to walk through the rooms as if he were looking for a ghost. He touched the books she was reading, put on the coat she left on the hanger that smelled of lavender. He sat in the same place on the sofa, and for a few seconds closed his eyes, trying to feel her warmth. But it was useless. Time does not forgive absences. It only deepens them. Everything was the same, and yet nothing made sense anymore. Home became a backdrop. Memories invaded like smoke. And Ethan, the man who could travel the world in private jets, no longer knew the way to the heart of a woman who only wanted to be loved with time, with presence, with attentive eyes. Now he was beginning to understand, but understanding too late tastes like punishment. Autumn arrived like an old friend that no one invited. The leaves began to fall on the sidewalks of New York, and the mornings began to smell like wet wood and forgotten memories. Ethan no longer attended gala events as often. He refused invitations, turned off his phone in the middle of the day, and disappeared for hours, staring at the horizon from the penthouse without saying a word. No one understood. Some said he was exhausted, others said he had lost something in a secret investment. But no one imagined that the hole inside him had the name of a woman he had loved in silence. One Sunday afternoon, he went out alone. He needed to breathe. He walked aimlessly, without any security, with no destination in mind. He ended up in a quieter residential neighborhood, the kind of place she said she would like to live one day, with a small vegetable garden and neighbors who greeted each other. She smiled bitterly as she remembered the comment. He had said at the time that it was something people who had given up on life would do. Now, all he wanted was the kind of simplicity he had once despised. That was when he saw her. She was in profile, crouched in front of a child who was holding a small book in both hands. Chloe was smiling in that way he knew well, a sweet, full smile, full of presence. Her eyes crinkled slightly at the sides, and even from a distance he could see that she was happy. She had no makeup, no expensive dress. She was wearing a simple coat, her hair loose in the wind. But she was beautiful, more than ever. He froze. His heart raced. He wanted to run, call her, tell her that he missed her, that he had changed, that he understood everything now. But his body didn't respond, because there was someone beside her, a simple man with a calm expression who placed his hand on her back naturally. She turned, laughed at something he said, and hugged him. For a second, Ethan felt the ground disappear. The scene lasted only a few seconds, but it was engraved on him like a tattoo. Chloe had moved on, and it wasn't revenge, nor provocation. It was just life. She had chosen to move on, and the cruelest part wasn't seeing her with someone else. It was seeing her happy, because that made it clear that she didn't need him. And maybe she never had. She had simply chosen him, and he didn't know how to be chosen. Ethan took a step back, then another. He turned the corner and leaned against a random wall, his chest burning. He wasn't crying, not yet, but there was something inside him that ached with an unbearable clarity. She was okay. He wasn't, and that was the price. Not for having lost her, but for not having known how to love her when she was still around. That same night, back at the apartment, Ethan sat on the living room floor for hours, his head in his hands. The lights were off. His cell phone was face down. The city outside throbbed with noise, but inside him there was only a muffled sound of regret. For the first time in a long time he felt ashamed. Of everything. Of what he was. Of what he didn't know how to be. Of what he let slip away without a fight. And he decided he would do what he had never done before. Apologize, but not with gifts or with promises. I wanted to talk to her, look her in the eyes and say, "I'm sorry. Not for what you said, but for what I never said." He sent flowers the next day, a whole bouquet of lavender, her favorite. No answer. He called her old number, which now went straight to voicemail. He searched for her online on social media and found nothing except a page for a small non-profit that distributed books to underprivileged neighborhoods. One of the photos showed children sitting on the floor laughing, and in the background, almost out of focus, was Chloe, her expression so light, so full, it hurt. He sent an email to the NGO's contact, asking to speak with her. He received a polite response from a volunteer. Chloe appreciates your contact, but would prefer not to resume personal communication. She wishes peace and serenity. Ethan read the message 10 times. Would prefer not to resume. It was final. And even though it was said sweetly, it tore at his core. The following week she sent a handwritten letter. Simple, straightforward. She said she understood late, but she understood. That she now knew that love was not a physical presence, but a daily choice. That her silence had been more eloquent than 1,000 speeches, and that if she ever wanted to look into his eyes again, he would be there. The letter was delivered, but no response came. Days turned into weeks, then months. He went on with his life like a man who breathes but does not live. Meetings were held, contracts were signed, but everything seemed odorless, bland. The food had no flavor, the music had no meaning, the world had lost color. He tried to distract himself. He traveled, moved furniture around, redecorated rooms, but it was all an attempt, because where love was, emptiness weighs more heavily. One night he decided to walk to the NGO's address. He saw the modest facade, the books piled high, the children laughing inside. But he didn't go in. He just stood on the other side of the street, hands in his pockets, watching. He saw Chloe walk by, absent-mindedly, carrying boxes. She smiled at someone, then disappeared through a side door. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm sorry." No one heard. But maybe the universe registered, because in that moment, something inside him finally broke. And for the first time since she left, Ethan cried. The following days were dominated by a kind of silence that no longer seemed like mere absence. It was a punishment. Ethan woke up, not hungry, wore the same clothes, forgot appointments. His secretary began to reschedule meetings that he simply ignored. The newspapers began to question his mental state, speculating financial crises, the departure of partners. But no one knew that what he lacked was not money. It was soul. On the dining table where she used to leave him notes, there were now crumpled papers, open bills, dirty cups. He, who before could not stand mess, now lived immersed in disorder. He walked through the rooms of the house as if looking for a shadow, a smell, any trace of her, and all he found was the echo of his own neglect. He tried to rekindle old friendships, sought help from therapists, accepted dinner invitations, but nothing filled him, because where love has truly lived, the emptiness that remains afterwards is absolute. His friends noticed. They began to say that he seemed like a different man. The confident and self-assured man had given way to a tired face, sad eyes, and a voice that was always hesitant. One morning, she got up in the middle of the night and went to the balcony. She looked at the silent city, the illuminated buildings, the starless sky. She remembered when Chloe said she wanted to plant lavender there. He had never let her. It would make a mess, he said. Now he would pay everything he had to see a little purple flower there in that corner. He smiled bitterly at the irony, because the flowers she had tried to plant were much deeper, and he had pulled them out without realizing it. He began to write. Short texts, letters he didn't send, sometimes just loose words. If I had stayed, if I had listened, if I had chosen. Regret became an addiction, and he fed it with memories. He remembered the smell of her hair in the morning, the way she said, "Calm down," when he lost control, her light touch when he had insomnia. He remembered the times when she just wanted to be heard, and he said they would talk later. Now everything was later, and she was no longer there. One day, he decided to go back to the bookstore where she worked. The place was under new management, but when he went in, he found on a forgotten shelf an old book with a dedication, "For those who know how to listen with their eyes." See. He touched the page with trembling fingers. He bought the book, took it home, and put it next to his bed. He read a page every night. It was like having a fragment of her there, but it was also a constant reminder of what he had missed by not paying attention. And so Ethan became a man who lived surrounded by everything, except that which made him come home. Weeks accumulated. Like dust on a forgotten table. Ethan no longer counted the days. The clock's hands passed like shadows, and he watched them unhurriedly, as if he no longer expected anything. The apartment, once impeccable, was now a faithful portrait of what it had become inside, accumulated with silence, longing, and absence. The home that once pulsed with the light sound of her footsteps now only echoed the sound of his own mistakes. A former business partner visited him one day, worried. When he came in, he found the lights off in the middle of the afternoon, piles of books scattered around, untouched dishes, and Ethan sitting on the floor with a blanket over his shoulders, staring into space. "You need help, man." But he just replied, "I needed it." The partner didn't understand. He didn't even respond. He just left, embarrassed, taking with him the certainty that something serious had been lost in this man who had previously been unbreakable. In an attempt to fight back, Ethan started going to the cafes they went to together. He sat in the same places, ordered the same things, hoping she would come in. She never did. But one day he saw an old photo on one of the walls. It was her, smiling with a group of children, on a volunteer project. He asked the waiter and learned that she had helped organize reading events there for a while. He stood in front of the image, as if paying homage to an altar. He began making anonymous donations to the NGO where she worked. Generous checks, books in boxes. A desperate attempt to be around without intruding. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to make up for it somehow, not out of guilt, but out of love. Mature, belated, desperate love. He was beginning to understand what she meant when she said that love was listening, being there, choosing. And now he would choose, even if she would never know it again. Chloe, on the other hand, never got in touch. She never answered letters, nor acknowledged public gestures. It was as if she had closed the door with a definitive affection, the kind that is not closed with resentment but with learning, and that hurt Ethan more than any anger could, because she didn't hate him. She had simply left for places where he no longer fit. At night, he would talk to the silence. Sometimes he would put her mug on the table, as if he expected her to come in, say something sweet, and sit down. She never did, and the ritual became a memory. One morning, as he lit one of the candles she loved so much, he finally murmured out loud, "You were everything I didn't know how to take care of, and now, you're everything I can't forget." The candle flame flickered as if in response, and for the first time, he understood that perhaps forgiveness would not come, and that life would go on with that scar, visible only to those who were sensitive enough to look. But sometimes, true repentance doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be felt, every day, like an echo inside your home. Winter arrived, with full force. The city wore shades of grey and the windows seemed to cry at dawn. Ethan now spent his mornings writing in an old hardcover notebook, sitting in the armchair where she used to read. He wrote to her, but never sent them. Maybe it was a way to keep talking to what was left. Maybe it was the only way to breathe. One cloudy Sunday, as he was out for a walk, he passed a small bookstore with a sign in the window. "Tomorrow, opening of the Chloe Hart Reading Room for children from underprivileged communities." He froze. He read it 3 times. Her name was there, printed in small, thin, soft letters, like her. He walked in slowly. The attendant, a young man with kind eyes, recognized his name. "You helped with the donations, right?" She never knew it was you. She never wanted to know, but without that help, this place wouldn't exist. Ethan just nodded. He couldn't speak. He walked between the newly organized shelves, filled with children's books, colorful pillows, drawings. Hanging on the walls, there was a scent of crayons in the air. In the center of the room, a small wooden plaque read, "To Chloe, who taught that true love doesn't scream, it stays." He knelt there, not for drama, but because his legs gave out. He read the sentence as if it were a whisper from her, going through everything, and there, in the middle of the simplicity she had always dreamed of, he understood what he had never understood before. Chloe didn't leave because she stopped loving. She left because loving someone too much who forgets you hurts more than leaving. He got up with effort, and for the first time in months he smiled. A sad smile, but a whole one. A smile of someone who knew there was no going back, but who had somehow arrived. Not where he wanted to be, but where he needed to be. That night he returned home, opened the last notebook where he had written to her, and for the first time, he did not write a letter, just one line. Today, I saw your name where it should have been from the beginning, in a place where lives are touched in silence. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and remained silent. A different silence, less bitter, more respectful. And every night after that, before he went to sleep, he lit a small candle on the porch, not for ritual, but for presence. And every time the flame flickered in the wind, he smiled slightly, as if she were still there, leaning against the doorframe, listening quietly, as she always had. And Ethan, the man who once said her smile was what made him come home, never found his way back, but he finally learned to dwell within repentance, with reverence, because when you lose someone like Chloe, absence becomes home. If this story touched your heart in any way, leave your like. This helps us continue telling stories that deserve to be felt. If you are not yet registered, click the subscribe button and activate the bell, because here, each video is a portrait of the soul. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever loved someone who only realized your worth after you left? Write it down below. The love that leaves in silence is the hardest to forget. And if this story moved you, the video that is now appearing on the screen will also mess with you. Click on it and dives into another story where destiny demands, and the heart responds.